Hello, everyone. I am Ashley Waxman. This is the daily briefing of the Israeli Citizen Spokespersons Office. If you're watching live online, you can start submitting your questions now. If I can't answer you live, I will go through the comments later. It's day 235 of the October 7th war. 125 hostages remain in Hamas terror dungeons, one of them being my cousin Agam, 19 years old. It's hard to believe, but many world leaders are calling on Israel to abandon these hostages and allow Hamas the opportunity to continue attacking Israelis and planning more October 7th-style massacres. These calls have intensified in the aftermath of an Israeli airstrike on Sunday on two Hamas arch-terrorists in the city of Rafah. The IDF said that the strike was carried out based on intelligence regarding the presence of the senior terrorists at the site. The IDF said it took a number of steps to reduce the risk of harming uninvolved civilians, including aerial surveillance and the use of precise munitions. Based on these measures, the IDF assessed that it did not expect that there would be any harm to uninvolved civilians. The strike was precise, but according to preliminary reports, shrapnel from the strike hit a fuel tank 100 meters away from the target, which started a fire that spread to an area where Palestinian civilians were taking shelter. Hamas said that dozens of civilians were killed in the fire. Gruesome images from the scene spread on social media, and the story was front-page news in many major newspapers around the world. In response, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said, "Despite our supreme effort not to harm uninvolved civilians, a tragic accident occurred to our regret. For us, every uninvolved civilian who is hurt is a tragedy. For Hamas, it's a strategy. That's the whole difference." The IDF's military advocate general is investigating the circumstances of the strike. This war that Hamas declared on Israel is awful, and the entire region is suffering from it. But the alternative to fighting this barbaric enemy is to abandon our citizens who were snatched from their beds or taken from a music festival to be raped, tortured, and executed. French President Emmanuel Macron called yesterday for an immediate ceasefire, but he did not demand that Hamas lay down its weapons, and he did not demand that Hamas release the hostages. This is an outrage. Israel has a very simple answer to anyone who calls on us to abandon our hostages and to give Hamas free rein to continue attacking Israelis. The simple answer is no. Israel cannot and will not abandon the hostages in the Hamas terror dungeons. Israel cannot and will not allow Hamas to continue firing rockets at Israeli cities. Israeli soldiers are currently risking their lives in Gaza in order to protect their families in Israel, a short distance away. The Israeli soldiers are engaging terrorists in close combat, face to face, and locating tunnels and weapons. Israel did not want this war, and Israel did not choose this war, but it will keep fighting this war until Hamas is destroyed, until the hostages come home, and until Gaza can never threaten Israel again. This war is a multi-front war. In the north, this morning, Hezbollah fired 3 anti-tank missiles from Lebanon into Israel. Yesterday, Hezbollah sent UAVs into Israeli airspace. Hezbollah has been attacking Israel since October 8th, when it decided to join Hamas in the war that Hamas started the day before. Think about that. Hezbollah saw Hamas's barbaric atrocities on October 7th and wanted to side with Hamas. That should tell you something about the kind of enemies that Israel is dealing with, all of whom are backed by the Islamic Republic of Iran. Hezbollah terrorists wake up in the morning, set up their anti-tank missiles, and shoot them at Israeli houses. The threat from Hezbollah has been building up for years. Israel's last war with Hezbollah ended in 2006 with a UN Security Council resolution demanding that Hezbollah disarm. But Hezbollah has only gotten stronger as the United Nations has done nothing. Now, today, more than 60,000 Israelis have been displaced from their homes, and countless businesses have been shut in the north due to the daily threat of Hezbollah. It is a reality that cannot continue. Hezbollah must back off, or it will be backed off. In the south of Israel last night, 2 hostile drones were intercepted near the city of Eilat. The IDF said that the drones approached Israeli territory from the east. Open a map, and you'll see what is to the east of Eilat. The drones likely crossed Jordanian airspace after being launched in Syria or Iraq by Iranian proxy militias. Iran has been waging war on Israel every day since October 7th. Israel has no choice but to keep fighting back. Finally, a brief update on Israel's efforts to facilitate the transfer of humanitarian aid into Gaza. Food, water, medicine, medical equipment, and shelter equipment are going into Gaza every day. Just yesterday, 378 trucks that were inspected in Israel crossed into Gaza via Kerem Shalom crossing, the same crossing that Hamas attacks again and again. The Rafah border crossing between Egypt and Israel remains closed, and it is closed because Egypt closed it. Egypt refuses to send aid into Gaza through its own border crossing. Have you ever asked yourself why? Why would Egypt want to stop humanitarian aid from getting into Gaza? Finally, after long delays, Egypt has begun to allow the humanitarian aid sitting in Egypt to move into Israel and from there to continue into Gaza. 154 trucks came from Egypt into Israel just yesterday and then continued into Gaza. 78 trucks of flour from the World Food Program were transferred to supply the organization's bakeries across Gaza. Israel has been sending enormous amounts of food into Gaza, even as Hamas continues to fight. According to a new academic study based on a careful investigation of the registry of aid going into Gaza, an average of 3,200 calories per day per person has entered Gaza over the last 4 months. There is a clear double standard on display. When Egypt blocks humanitarian aid, there is no global condemnation, and Egypt is praised when it does the bare minimum. When Israel lets humanitarian aid in, there is global condemnation that more aid is not getting in. Then, when Israel opens more air, land, and sea routes, the UN pretends that the situation is only getting worse. Such a double standard should be called out by all fair-minded people. Let's take some questions.
We have a question from Lior on Instagram. Lior asks, I saw reports of a shooting incident on the Israel-Egypt border. Do you know what happened? Do you have any new information about this event?
Well, the circumstances of the cross-border shooting are not entirely clear at the moment. And it is currently not known which side opened fire first. There were no casualties among Israeli forces. Both Egypt and Israel are currently investigating the incident together. One early report is suggesting that Israeli forces came under fire, but it wasn't clear from where, whether it was Hamas terrorists or from an Egyptian soldier. We will have to wait for more information from official sources on that one.
Neve, also on Instagram, writes, I saw images of beheaded children in Rafah. Many people are asking, aren't you doing to Palestinians what Hamas did on October 7th? What is the best response to this? Well,
I think the question that we need to be asking all those people saying that is, well, do you see the difference in intention? What the Palestinians did, or more specifically, what Hamas did on October 7th, was an intentional, planned attack on civilians with the intent to genocide the Jews on the other side of the border. Israel, in self-defense of its civilians, waged war on Hamas. And what I would say is, how dare anyone try to equate between what was done on October 7th and Israel, a sovereign democratic nation, doing whatever it can to defend its civilians. Israel has an obligation to defend its civilians from future attacks, and Hamas has stated that its intention is to commit October 7th again and again and again. So how dare they for trying to equate between the two?
On Instagram, someone named Paul writes, I saw this week there were rockets in Tel Aviv and the surrounding area. Why do you think this is not getting as much attention in the news as the situation in Gaza?
Well, you know, if it bleeds, it leads. We have the Iron Dome system here in Israel, which obviously protects us Israeli citizens. Our government invested billions of dollars in protecting Israeli civilians, unlike Hamas, which uses its tunnels not to protect its civilians, but to protect themselves. Because we are not seeing so many casualties, because Israel is so well defended from rockets, I think it's just not interesting for the media. But I'm going to go further into that and say there is clearly a global campaign to smear Israel and to get it to stop its war and to get it to stop defending itself and its civilians. And this campaign, as we know, is backed by the UN and UN agencies and NGOs, many governments, Qatari funded, for example, and of course, the Islamic regime. And broadcasting Israel or an Israeli is under attack simply doesn't fit that narrative for them.
And our last question is from Sarah on Instagram, who asks, how can ordinary citizens support the hostages?
That's a great question. And I think, especially being a family member of a hostage, I think the best thing is to just continue raising awareness, continue putting up signs. And, you know, when you're in your spaces, whether it's at school or whether it's at work or just in a social occasion, and you hear people speaking about the war, just continue to bring up the hostages. It's so simple. If the hostages were released and Hamas laid down their weapons and surrendered, this whole war would come to an end. So continue advocating for our hostages and speaking up. I want to invite you at this point to follow the Israeli Citizen Spokespersons Office on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and X. So make sure you're following us and stay tuned for tomorrow, 3 o'clock Israeli time, 8 o'clock Eastern time for tomorrow's daily briefing. Thank you very much.